Yes, so start with Taliban. They are not a legitimate representative of Afghanistan people. They are not recognized, and they are now invited in Oslo for talks. Is it like a paving path for them for recognition by the West, by EU or other countries?
I think our state, how we view the status is quite clear. This is not a recognition, it's not an acceptance. Now, the problem is that Norway does not recognize governments, we recognize states. But we share the view of the Western countries that this does not represent recognition in itself. But we need more of a dialogue, and the situation in Afghanistan dictates a dialogue, as I've said many times before.
Yes, you spoke about discussing the Taliban, engaging with them. But human rights reports, your reports are all looking at with all these human rights abuses, restricting women's rights by the Taliban, and now they're there to speak or discuss human rights with Norwegian and other representatives. Do you expect any result from these talks?
It's hard to expect concrete results, but I think the dialogue is important. You know, normally it takes time to come to any concrete results, but I think this meeting is important, and I think it's very, very good that the Norwegian government, in fact, re-engages the way it now does and organizes this meeting. It's the first in the West after the 15th of August, and therefore also important. But when it comes to women's rights, you know, that's been on the agenda, as far as I understand, much of the day today. And what I hear is that the discussions have been rather constructive, I underline. And I also believe, as I think I've told you before, that there is no agreement among the Taliban either about how to handle women's rights, how to handle the question of schools. You see in some 8 provinces, I think, girls will be allowed to go until 12th grade. There's a question of reopening public universities. And in other provinces, you see a much more conservative attitude. So I think it's important at this stage, if it is correct that there is a disagreement here, I think it's very important to try to influence those forces who are in favor of being more flexible.
So the Taliban delegation from Kabul include Anas Akhani, that he is in the blacklist of US and UN, and he's literally belonged to a terrorist group of network of Akhani. How Norway will take this while having such a delegation in Norway and talking to these people?
By some groups, of course, it's not been taken well at all, particularly since he's believed to be the mastermind behind an attack in 2008 in March in January, that killed a Norwegian journalist. So that, of course, has led to some protests here. Why should we invite a person like that? Now, of course, he has been given an exemption allowing him to travel. He is an important figure. He is in the Taliban team, and therefore, you know, this is one of the dilemmas of conflicts, and I think we have to accept that this is a difficult issue. But I also think it was right of the Norwegian government to do as they have done. And this has also been done with the agreement of the other Western countries that participate, of course.
Yeah, you mentioned that other countries will participate as well, and probably US rep is as well there. How do you see EU's stance that EU didn't even react to continuing women protests in Afghanistan or mistreatment of the Taliban with the women, and now instead they reopen an office in Kabul? What was the urgency and how it will benefit them?
I think it's obvious that it's urgent to engage, for the West to engage in Afghanistan. I mean, the humanitarian crisis is of such proportions that is almost unbelievable. I think the appeal that came from the UN the other day, $5 billion, is the biggest that has come from the UN ever. That says a little bit about, or it says much about the seriousness of the situation, and we have to respond to that. And so far, of course, humanitarian aid has been coming in, but far from what is required to save the Afghan people. And to me, it's more important, as you know, to save the Afghan people than not to invite the Taliban to a meeting. So I hope there will be constructive meetings on that. I saw also, by the way, that I think it was New York Times editorial board that argued that the frozen money should be released. And I think there is a growing view in the West that we cannot, in this situation, sit on $9.5 billion that will be needed for the Afghan economy to start, people to get into jobs, people to earn, a hunger catastrophe to be avoided, or at least to be limited as much as possible, and also for a new refugee flow to start. And so, I mean, what are the priorities here? To me, it's always been the Afghan people.
That's exactly right. You mentioned also Afghanistan government, but the Taliban are not representing Afghanistan people. Is not elected government. They are de facto leadership of the country. However, so also U.S. envoy from State Department, U.S. envoy for women, Afghan women and girls and human rights, Noori, she says that there should be a coherent coordination among the countries when it comes to approach with the Taliban or dealing with the Taliban. Is there like a way of EU somehow synchronizing its policies with the US and UN when it comes to deal with the Taliban?
I think EU is doing the right thing. I think more should be doing the same. So if we want a coherent and joint approach, I think the EU's approach is the right one. So it's easy to find a joint approach, you know, follow what the EU is doing today. I think that is the only sensible way of handling the situation. And that does not mean recognition. It means understanding that in order to solve the ongoing crisis, there has to be an engagement. You cannot completely ignore the people who de facto have a... you cannot completely ignore the people who de facto are in control of the country.
That's right. So also let's talk about as last question, you can explain more. What is EU expectation from this meeting with the Taliban, and how EU members, like what kind of condition they are expecting from the Taliban to cooperate in case they plan or maybe they're willing to recognize the Taliban as government of Afghanistan maybe in future?
Well, in addition to what we talked about, the women's right, freedom of expression, also very important, then I think to establish a more inclusive government would be a very, very constructive step forward, and that could contribute to a recognition of the government. And I noticed that in the delegation that left yesterday from Kabul, there is not only Taliban representatives, there are also representatives from other parts of the political elite, not those who were closely associated with the Ghani regime, but others, and others who have been staying in Kabul and who have been arguing for a more coherent and inclusive government. And I think the fact that they are also there is a very encouraging sign.
What about women? A lot of Afghan women leaders also participating. At the same time, a lot of them are protesting. There are two different views are coming out, that some they are trying to speak to the Taliban, some are really critical of the Taliban, and they don't even see them as the legitimate representative of them, especially women. What's your thoughts about it? How women can raise their voice in this meeting?
I think it's, I have no doubts that women who participated in today's meeting, for instance, which to a large extent I understand had to do with women's rights, I think they need to be there. They need to speak out. There have been very prominent women, as far as I understand, participating. At the same time, I must say, I see with great admiration the courage and determination of women in Afghanistan, in Kabul and elsewhere, who dare to go out in the street and demonstrate. And that says something also about the new Afghanistan. It's an Afghanistan that has changed. It's an Afghanistan used to women's rights, used to freedom of expression, etc. And I think the Taliban will not be able to ignore that.
What is the alternative solution for Afghanistan if not these talks didn't result to anything? What will be alternative for Afghanistan?
I think the alternative could easily, I'm not only talking about the Oslo meeting, but the process as such. If there's no agreement coming out of this, that will lead to an acceptance by the West and by the international community of the government, then I think you will not be in a situation where the old government will come back. That's not going to happen. You will have a political collapse with all that means. It means riots in the street. It means greater problems in getting humanitarian assistance to where it is needed. I think it will be more suffering, more killing, and I think people should think about that. What is the alternative to working with those who are today in power and trying to improve the way they govern? And then I'm talking about fundamental rights and inclusiveness. There is no alternative that we would like to see.